You know that feeling when everything in your life feels like it's finally falling into place? That was me. I was on top of the world, counting down the days until I married the love of my life, Sarah. She wasn't just my fiancée. She was my everything. The woman I dreamed about since I was old enough to understand what love was. The one I thought I'd grow old with, sharing every laugh, every tear, every milestone. The past 6 months were a whirlwind of wedding planning. We fought over color schemes, venues, and even the guest list. They were stupid arguments, trivial in the grand scheme of things. But we always made up by the end of the day. I figured that's just what love was. Working through the little bumps and coming out stronger. Sarah had been under a lot of pressure lately. She wanted everything to be perfect. She was hitting the gym almost every day, obsessing over her dress, her hair, her diet. I told her she was already perfect, but she just laughed it off, saying, "You'll thank me when you see the wedding pictures." I loved her, and if this was what she needed to feel confident, I supported her. I didn't realize then that the cracks in our relationship weren't about table arrangements or cake flavors. They were deeper, darker, and they were about to shatter everything I thought I knew about the woman I loved. A week before the wedding, I had to take a quick business trip to Seattle. It wasn't ideal, but I promised Sarah I'd be back in plenty of time for the big day. She insisted she didn't mind. "I'll be busy anyway," she said. "My friends are flying in, and I need to pick them up from the airport." Her friends. A group of people I'd only heard about in passing. Sarah talked about them like they were a pivotal part of her life, but I hadn't met most of them. She reassured me they were important to her, and I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? The trip went smoothly. I knocked out my meetings and caught an early flight back home. I was looking forward to spending those last few days with Sarah, going over final details and just soaking up the excitement together. But when I got home, the house was empty. I texted her. No response. I called. Straight to voicemail. At first, I wasn't worried. I figured she was out with her friends or maybe having a bachelorette party. But as the hours ticked by, unease started creeping in. Sarah wasn't the type to leave me in the dark. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. Relief washed over me until I read the words. "I'm sorry, we need to break up. I cheated on you." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as my vision tunneled. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I read it again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But there it was, plain and cruel. I called her immediately, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. She didn't answer. Another text came through. "I can't do this over the phone. I'm at my parents' house. Please don't come here." Rage, confusion, devastation. A cocktail of emotions slammed into me all at once. I ignored her message and drove straight to her parents' house. Her mom opened the door, her face pale and drawn. "She doesn't want to see you," she said softly. "Sarah needs to tell me what's going on," I demanded, my voice cracking. Reluctantly, she let me in. Sarah was sitting in the living room, her face blotchy from crying. I'd never seen her like this, broken, guilty, but somehow distant, like she'd already detached herself from our life together. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for this to happen." "What didn't you mean for to happen, Sarah?" I snapped. "You're sorry? Sorry for what?" "For blowing up our life 5 days before the wedding." She flinched but didn't respond. I pressed harder. Who? Who did you cheat on me with?" She looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. "James." The name hit me like a freight train. James was her best friend from college. The guy she'd always sworn was just like a brother to her. I had my suspicions over the years, sure, but she always shut them down, calling me paranoid. "James? Are you kidding me? He's in town for the wedding, and this is what you do." She started crying again, but I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy. Not now. Not after she'd torn my heart out and stomped on it. "I don't even know how it happened," she sobbed. "When I saw him, all these old feelings came rushing back. I tried to fight it, but—" "You tried to fight it?" I exploded. "What? Did your clothes just fall off by accident?" Her mom stepped in, trying to calm things down, but I wasn't having it. I needed answers. "Did you sleep with him?" I demanded. Answer me, Sarah. She nodded, and my world officially collapsed. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the timing, the sheer disrespect of it. We were days away from committing to each other for life, and she threw it all away for a fling with her best friend. I left her parents' house in a daze. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from Sarah, her friends, even my own family, but I ignored them all. My mind was racing, spiraling. How had I been so blind? How could she do this to me? To us? The wedding was off. There was no salvaging this. But the fallout was just beginning. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember how I got there, but I found myself sitting in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest felt like it was being crushed. This was supposed to be the happiest week of my life, and now everything was ashes. I walked into the house, the one we'd spent months filling with furniture and decorations we picked out together, and it felt like a tomb. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of her. The framed photo of us at the Grand Canyon, the half-empty bottle of her favorite wine on the counter, the wedding invitations stacked neatly on the dining table. I picked one up, staring at the words, Sarah and Michael, a love to last a lifetime. I laughed, a cold, bitter sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me, and then I tore the invitation in half, and then another, and another. Soon, I was ripping them all apart, scattering the pieces across the floor. When I ran out of invitations, I collapsed onto the couch, my chest heaving, my head pounding. I didn't cry. Not yet. The anger was too raw, too consuming. The first call I answered was from my best friend, Eric. Dude, what the hell happened? I just heard from Lisa that the wedding's off. Lisa was Sarah's maid of honor. Of course the gossip train was already in full swing. She cheated, I said flatly, the words tasting like poison. With James. Eric went silent for a moment. Then, that piece of shit? I knew something was off about him. Want me to come over? I didn't. I didn't want anyone to see me like this, a broken shell of a man whose fiancée had just ripped his heart out. But Eric showed up anyway, armed with a six-pack of beer and a determination to keep me from doing anything stupid. We sat in silence for a long time, the TV on but ignored. Finally, he said, "What's your next move?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was my next move? Do I crawl back to her, begging for answers? Do I burn every memory of her to the ground? Or do I seek out James and beat the living hell out of him? The answer came to me the next morning when I woke up, hungover and still seething. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not without consequences. The first thing I did was call the wedding venue and cancel. The woman on the other end of the line was sympathetic, but I could hear the judgment in her voice when I told her the wedding was off. "I'm so sorry to hear that," she said. "Is there anything we can do to help?" "Yeah," I said bitterly. "Can you refund a broken heart?" Next, I contacted our photographer, the caterer, and the DJ. Each call was like ripping off a bandage, exposing the raw wound beneath. By the time I was done, I felt hollowed out. But the worst part was yet to come. The wedding was a destination affair, and family and friends were already making their way into town. I had to break the news to them, explain why everything was unraveling. My parents were devastated. My mom cried, blaming herself for not seeing the signs, as if this was somehow her fault. My dad, usually the stoic one, muttered something about wanting to wring James's neck. And then there were Sarah's parents. Her mom called, pleading with me to reconsider. "She made a mistake, Michael. People make mistakes. You love her, don't you?" I hung up without answering. The confrontation with James was inevitable. I found him at the bar where Sarah and her friends had planned to have a casual get-together before the wedding. He was there, laughing with some of her out-of-town friends like nothing had happened. My blood boiled at the sight of him. I marched up, ignoring the curious glances from the others, and grabbed him by the collar. "You've got some nerve showing your face here," I hissed. His grin vanished, replaced by a guilty, panicked expression. "Mike, man, I didn't." "Don't you dare man me," I snapped. "You slept with my fiancée. You ruined my life. What do you have to say for yourself?" He stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but I didn't let him. It took two guys to pull me off him. Someone called the cops. But when they showed up, they seemed to understand my rage. They let me off with a warning, telling me to go home and cool off. That night, alone in the house, the anger finally gave way to despair. I sat in the dark, scrolling through old photos of Sarah and me. Her smile, so radiant, now felt like a cruel joke. The memories we'd made together were tainted, poisoned by her betrayal. I thought about everything I'd sacrificed for her. The late nights at work to afford her dream wedding. The times I bit my tongue during arguments because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. The plans we made for our future, buying a house, starting a family, all of it was gone. Finally, the tears came. Silent, bitter tears that I didn't bother wiping away. I felt like a fool for believing in her, for thinking we were unbreakable. But even through the heartbreak, one thought kept nagging at me. Why? Why now? Why, James? I needed answers, even if they destroyed me. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been run over by a truck. My body ached, my head throbbed, and my heart felt like it had been ripped out and stomped on. But I couldn't wallow. Not yet. I needed to confront Sarah one last time. I texted her. We need to talk. In person. Now. She didn't reply immediately, and I was about to head over to her parents' house again when my phone buzzed. Okay, I'll meet you at the park. The park. The same one where I'd proposed to her. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I arrived, Sarah was already there, sitting on the bench where I'd once gotten down on one knee. She looked different. Not the confident, radiant woman I'd fallen in love with, but someone hollowed out by guilt and regret. I sat down next to her, leaving a deliberate gap between us. Why? I asked, my voice low and strained. I just need to understand why you did this. She looked down at her hands, twisting her engagement ring, the one I'd spent months saving up for. I don't even know where to start, she said quietly. Start with the truth, I said sharply. For once, just give me the truth. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. When James walked through the door, it was like all the feelings I thought I'd buried came rushing back. He was my first love, Michael. We were together in college, and I thought I'd moved on, but— You didn't, I interrupted. No, she admitted. I thought I did. I love you, Michael. I swear I do. But seeing him again, it brought back everything we had. And he told me he still loves me, that he's loved me all these years. I felt confused. Confused? I snapped. Confused enough to sleep with him 5 days before our wedding? She winced but didn't deny it. It was a mistake, she whispered. I didn't plan for it to happen. I swear, it just did. You keep saying that, like it excuses what you did, I said, my voice rising. But it doesn't. You made a choice, Sarah. You chose him over me. She started crying again, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not this time. I can't marry someone who doesn't love me enough to stay faithful, I said. Someone who would throw everything away for a fling with her best friend. It wasn't a fling, she said, almost too quietly to hear. What? She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. It wasn't a fling, Michael. I think I still have feelings for him. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. It was one thing to cheat, to claim it was a mistake born out of confusion. But to admit she still had feelings for him? That was the final nail in the coffin. I stood up, unable to sit there a moment longer. You don't think, Sarah. You know. And if you still have feelings for him, then we're done. For good. Michael, please, she begged, grabbing my hand. I don't want to lose you. You already did, I said coldly, pulling my hand away. I walked away, leaving her sobbing on that bench. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not after what she'd done. The next few days were a blur of cancellations, awkward conversations, and sleepless nights. Friends and family tried to comfort me, but their words felt hollow. Nothing they said could take away the pain of losing the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. Eric stayed by my side, helping me navigate the mess Sarah had left in her wake. He was the one who suggested I get tested for STDs, just to be safe. The thought hadn't even crossed my mind, but once he said it, I couldn't shake the fear. What if she'd exposed me to something? The test came back clean, but the process itself was humiliating. Sitting in a clinic, Explaining to a stranger why I needed to be tested was a stark reminder of how much my life had unraveled. Then there was the issue of the wedding gifts. Some people had already started sending them, and I couldn't bear to look at them. I ended up donating most of them to charity. The thought of keeping them felt wrong, like clinging to a future that no longer existed. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I came across a photo that made my stomach churn. It was a group picture from the bar where I'd confronted James. There he was, smiling with a drink in hand, surrounded by Sarah's friends. And there she was, standing next to him, her head tilted toward him in a way that felt too familiar. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking with anger. She wasn't just moving on, she was moving on with him. I wanted to call her, to scream at her, to demand answers. But what was the point? She'd made her choice, and it wasn't me. That night, I sat in the dark, nursing a glass of whiskey and replaying every moment of our relationship in my mind. I thought about the good times, the laughs, the dreams we shared. And then I thought about the betrayal, the lies, the pain. I realized that the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was gone. Maybe she never existed. The days turned into weeks, and the initial shock of Sarah's betrayal began to morph into something darker. At first, it was rage. I couldn't stop imagining the two of them together. James whispering sweet nothings into her ear, Sarah falling for his lies. Every time I closed my eyes, the images played on a loop, and I hated them both more with each passing second. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects just to avoid going home. The house felt suffocating, every room a monument to what could have been. The wedding dress she'd picked out was still in the closet. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Eric tried to keep me sane, dragging me out for drinks or a game of pool when he could see I was spiraling. But even he couldn't fill the void. "You gotta stop torturing yourself, man," he said one night after I'd downed my third beer. "Sarah's not worth it. You dodged a bullet." Did I? I shot back. Because it doesn't feel like it. Feels like I walked straight into the line of fire. He didn't have an answer for that. A month after the breakup, I got a call from Sarah's mom. She wanted to check in and see how I was doing. "How do you think I'm doing?" I said bitterly. "Your daughter cheated on me, and now she's probably playing house with James." There was a pause, and then she said something that stopped me cold. "She's not with James." "What?" "She told us it didn't work out. He left town last week." The thought of James leaving should have brought me some satisfaction, but it didn't. All it did was reopen the wound. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Because she's not okay, Michael. She's been crying nonstop, barely eating. She knows she messed up, and she regrets it. She should have thought about that before she destroyed my life," I said, hanging up. Sarah tried reaching out a few times after that. Texts, voicemails, even a handwritten letter. I ignored them all at first, but the letter caught my eye. Her handwriting was messy, like she'd been shaking while writing it. She poured her heart out, apologizing over and over, saying she didn't deserve my forgiveness but needed me to know how sorry she was. "I wish I could take it all back," she wrote. "I was weak, and I let myself ruin the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day you can remember the good times we had without hating me." I read the letter 3 times before crumpling it up and throwing it in the trash. Her regrets didn't change what she'd done. The final straw came when I ran into her at the grocery store. It had been almost 2 months since the breakup, and I hadn't seen her in person since that day at the park. She looked terrible. Pale, thin, with dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity, but then she smiled, a small, tentative smile, and the pity evaporated. "Michael," she said softly, "can we talk?" "There's nothing left to say," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I just want to explain." "You've already explained," I interrupted. "You chose him over me, and now you're dealing with the consequences, just like I am." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stick around to watch them fall. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the cereal aisle. That night, I went home and finally did what I'd been avoiding for weeks. I took down the photos of us, boxed up the mementos, and threw out the wedding dress. It was cathartic, but it also felt like I was burying a part of myself. I wasn't the same man I was before Sarah's betrayal. She'd taken a piece of me with her, and I didn't know if I'd ever get it back. It's been a year since that fateful week, and I'd like to say I've moved on. But the truth is, the scars are still there. Some days, I wake up feeling almost normal. Other days, I'm hit with a wave of sadness so intense it feels like I'm drowning. I've tried dating, but it's hard to trust anyone. Every time I get close to someone, I hear Sarah's voice in my head. See her face when she admitted she still had feelings for James. I've learned to live with the pain, though. It's a part of me now, a reminder of what I've been through and what I'll never allow myself to go through again. If there's one thing I've taken away from all of this, it's that love isn't always enough. You can give someone your whole heart, but if they don't cherish it, they'll break it without a second thought. Sarah taught me that the hard way. And while I'll never forgive her for what she did, I can at least thank her for teaching me to guard my heart more carefully, because some wounds never fully heal.